Hey everybody, welcome to Ultimate Coaster X. This is a free coaster simulator that came out on Steam a few days ago, and there are a couple of things that I do want to note about this. This is an early access game, and it's built by only one person, so don't make your expectations too high, but I still think that this is worth looking into, especially because it's free, and it also has VR support, so if you have a VR set, and you're interested in coming up with your own coasters and riding them, I think this game works out quite well, and I think really one of the major selling points that it has is, for me at least, that it has an amazing coaster creator, which is honestly one of the best coaster builders that I've ever seen. It kind of hits a balance between Planet Coaster and NoLimits, I think. It's much more accurate, realistic and smooth than the Planet Coaster coaster builder, but it's easier and maybe even more intuitive than the NoLimits one. Although, of course, it has a lot less options and a lot less control over what you do with your coasters than NoLimits. It's nowhere near as professional as a tool as that is, being just a one-man project. But still, it's really worth looking into. It's a very impressive game for a one-man project. Now, some of the things which you might be able to see are not as well developed is the UI, which is quite simple. The camera controls are a bit clunky. The game is still a bit buggy, and aside from the coasters themselves, there's not a lot to the game. There's some basic terrain editing tools, as you can see, and there are two trees, which are some of the worst trees that I've ever seen, so it's not as great in that respect, but it's still an early access game, so a lot can still change. What's really kept my hopes up is that the game has been updated quite a bit already, even though it's only been out on Steam for a few days. The developer has taken in a lot of constructive criticism and updated it quite a few times. And yeah, I have to say this is a beta version, which you can see running over here. And I don't know how much is already in the public release as well. But even in just this beta version in the last couple of days, there's been the addition of an undo button, strict nodes, which I'll get back to that later. And there's even Steam support now, which is really cool, and something that the game didn't originally come with. So yeah, really, there's a lot of potential here, is what I'd say in general. But really the star of the show is the coaster builder. So for this video, I want to keep the focus on the coaster builder, just to let you know how that works, and so you can see whether this would be something for you or not. So what I've been thinking to do is to start a time-lapse where I build my own first full layout coaster, because even though I've messed with the controls and tried to get used to them, I haven't built a full layout yet. But before that, I just want to explain really quickly so you can clearly see how they work, what the coaster builder mechanics are. So if you want to build a coaster, you basically start a new track over here, and then you can see the UI is very simple. But once you start to get a reading of how this works, it works quite well, I think. Here you can see all the different types of coaster types that you can use. The box spines are B&Ms, girder is Intamin, then there are some wooden, RMC, and Aero and SLC options. I'm just going to go for an Intamin coaster for now. And then the way that you build track is not piece by piece, like it would be in Planet Coaster, for instance. It's a bit more similar to NoLimits, but you are doing everything in this 3D space live. So I can place a control point here, and then if I place another one here, it's going to build a track section, and that's basically how it works. Now this is pretty long, so I'm going to make that a bit shorter, maybe about 16 meters. That's going to be my station, and then if I want to continue from there, I can hold shift to raise the control point up and down, and I can hold Z to make it in a straight line. So if I combine those two things, I can basically make sure that I get a straight lift hill like this. So I'm just gonna build one large straight section here and top that off at the end here. Yeah, that looks about right. Now you can always mess quite a bit with the shaping, because you can just grab these control points and manipulate them in any way that you like. So for instance here, you can make this node strict to make sure that it's straight, and this is why the addition of strict nodes is absolutely awesome, and I love it. And then if you want to build curves and things like that, you just let go of the Z key and raise your node up and down and just place it wherever you like. And even though it's super simple and really there's not a lot of UI to it, I really like the blue line that you get that sort of draws to the ground and shows you very clearly where you are building, because it makes it very easy to build curves. So if I want to have a curving drop, for instance, all I do is just lower these control points, and there you go. That's a lift hill and a first curved drop. I'm actually gonna expand that a little bit, just because I think the end of the lift hill isn't quite good there. Something like that should be good. Don't want to add an extra note there. And yeah, that is a first drop, basically. And it automatically smooths out as well, because it only renders the track after you're done building. So as you can see, the track doesn't exactly follow the nodes, it just sort of follows the path of least resistance. And you can manipulate the tracks in many other ways to, for instance, get banking and track types and supports. So for the banking, for instance, you place very similar control points. So I want it to be 0% on the lift hill, so I'm gonna select 0 there. But then for this drop, I do want to have some mild banking, so I'm gonna place a point here, make it bank 30 degrees, something like that. That should be fine. And now the track section is banked, as you can see. Actually, maybe I want to raise that up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. And then what we can also do is to give tracks different types. So to select a station track or a chain lift, or even different types of track in terms of, you know, whether it's just a simple flat track or whether it's a box track. We can put these control points for segments that'll divide the track into different segments. So once you've made that division, we can select this part to be a station track. We can select this to be a chain track. And then this is going to be a 3-tube standard track. But we can also change that depending on what kind of, you know, design we want to have to it. So I would actually go for a spineless, because that's a pretty small drop. So that's going to make it just a flat track. So if we leave the coaster builder, it renders out the track. I've said the word track too many times in the last few sentences, but it's pretty much unavoidable in this context, I suppose. And yeah, that is basically how you build coasters here. So as you can see, it's not too difficult. I haven't even built my first coaster layout yet. But after a few hours of just practicing with the tools, I think you can quite easily get the hang of it. Obviously, you can write them as well. So let's just see if this curve is actually smooth at all, because I didn't really put any effort into it. But yeah, it looks like it's pretty good. As you can see, quite smooth. So I'm happy with that. So yeah, that is basically how the track builder works. And if you really get good at it, you might be able to build layouts like this. So I'm just gonna go into a quick time lapse and see if I can come up with anything good. Let's go. Alright, so halfway through the building of this coaster, I realized that I could reasonably do it in an hour, so I decided to give myself an hour to work on this and see how far I would get. And I decided to build an intimate megalite coaster, just because I really love these things. Just because they're such airtime machines, and they're quite small and not too difficult to build, so probably a good coaster to try first in the game. So what I want to get down first is the lift hill, and this is not going to be too tall since it's really a small coaster. And then into a drop and a helix, well, not quite a helix, a turnaround, I guess. Very similar to real life intimate megalites. They all have the exact same layout though, so I do want to make this one a bit different. It's a bit smaller as well, so I guess I could call this the intimate mini light, not sure. But very similar to the existing ones, it kind of does a quick turnaround into an airtime hill. Although in real life this is a twisted airtime hill, and I didn't really like that one in real life, so I'm just making this a simple camelback. No banking, no special tricks whatsoever. And as you can see, I'm trying to not use too many nodes, and really manipulating the nodes that I do have as much as possible to get them into the shapes that I want, and to try and get them to be as smooth as I can get them. At least also within this time frame. I already have to say this is not a super smooth coaster, and you could definitely do better if you give yourself more time and try to tweak it until it's smooth enough. So there will be some bumps in this, but overall I think it's an acceptable quality, and especially the airtime hills I think came out quite alright. So moving on from that first camelback, there's another turn into a double down actually here, which is not too common for these kinds of things. I actually wanted to just make it another simple airtime hill, but there was the station right underneath it, so I was kind of forced to do this double down which I think is pretty fun. Not something you typically see on these kinds of coasters, but can't be too bad, I suppose. And then after that, another airtime hill here. And every now and then I will be testing the coaster. So once you leave the editor, it renders out the track and you can test it and ride it. And especially given that most of the time you're just staring at weird lines and splines, I do like to do that every now and then just so you get an idea of what the coaster is actually going to look like. Now my next element here was a stangle dive, which is quite a nice intimate element. And then after that I decided to add in 2 twisted airtime hills, and these are really staples of the original Intimate Megalite layout. And I never really saw the appeal of these things until I rode the standard Intimate Megalite layout myself. These twisted airtime hills are amazing at throwing you out of your seat. Not just with negative airtime, but with laterals as well, which is super cool. Really like these things, so why not put some in this layout as well? Kind of, you know, make it an all-star layout with some of the best elements of the Megalites, but in a slightly smaller package, I suppose. So yeah, that is basically the entire layout, and from this point onwards, there's just a bunch of tweaking and doing some support work as well. This is something which I forgot to point out in the intro, but you can also add supports to your coaster in this game. Although, unlike NoLimits, where you just kind of place nodes and have to make the supports all by yourself, there's an automatic support generator, and the manual support generator really just lets you decide where the supports are going to be placed, but you don't actually place the individual beams yourself. That said, there's quite a bit of control about this, so you can change the angle at which the supports are built, and you can decide whether there are 2 support beams or just 1. But at the moment, at least, you can't get into more advanced support structures or horizontal support beams and things like that. So it's a bit basic, but it's also quite easy to use. So there's some upsides and downsides to it, I think. And that is pretty much the layout, I think. Yeah, at this point I'm just changing some of the supports and finally also doing a little bit of terrain work to make it seem as if it's actually in a real setting. I tried making some of the supports thinner over here, and then I realized I didn't want to do that for the whole track, so I didn't end up doing it. But realistically, if I wanted to make this a really realistic Intimate Megalite, the supports would probably have to be a little bit thinner, and there would probably have to be more supports as well. The way that the automatic support generation works, it just places one every 12 meters, or every 11 meters, I think is what I've set it to. But in real life, you'd have more supports in valleys and low-lying areas of the coaster, and you'd have less supports at the top of the hills and things like that, just because of how gravity works. I don't know, I'm not an engineer, but that's usually how it is. So yeah, finally I decided to put it on the river side. I didn't want to put it over the water, which I thought of first, because then the footers kind of disappear into the water. Not a big fan of that, to be honest, but I guess this works. It at least makes sure that the coaster isn't in the middle of nowhere. Now that is pretty much it for the building process, so let's get back into the game and see what it looks like. Alright, so here's the coaster, and let's start by actually just giving it a ride. So the cable lift is pretty fast. Also, that's worth pointing out, you can use a cable lift instead of a chain. Into this first curve, not the smoothest, but you can definitely tell that it just transitions a lot better than Planet Coaster does, for instance. So yeah, there was a bit of a pump on that curve just now, but overall, I'm decently happy. That was a smooth curve. This camelback over here is great. Stangle dive is quite smooth, bit of a pump here. But yeah, most of the ride rides pretty well, I think. At least for something that I just put together very quickly, just to try and get used to the coaster builder. Now there's a number of other things which I think are worth pointing out as well. If you're just all about riding the coasters, or if you have a VR set and you just like checking out layouts on VR, that's fine. But if you care about realism as well, you want to crunch the numbers. And I've heard from the dev that he's not too sure exactly how on point the numbers are, but as far as I've seen, they seem to be pretty accurate. And you can check the speed throughout different parts of the ride over here. You can check the acceleration, the vertical g-forces, and the lateral g-forces. And when you look at the vertical g's, They're pretty high on some parts. I mean, this is some decently strong floater airtime, but there's some sustained, very strong ejector here, over here as well. And this whole hill is just almost a sustained, like minus 1.3. Should be more sustained actually. Might want to tighten that a little bit. But yeah, overall, pretty happy with this layout. Of course, there's a number of things which, you know, would be much better, which I would take the time to do if I gave enough of a fuck to improve this layout, but to be honest, I really don't. For something that was put together for an hour just to see how intuitive the game feels, how it feels to control the coaster builder, I think it'll do the job fine, and I'm pretty happy with this. So that's all I want to say about Ultimate Coaster X for now. If you're interested in theme park simulation games, I highly recommend that you check this out on Steam. It's free anyway. And as for me, I'll be keeping an eye on this game, and I'll probably keep playing it, and maybe in the future, when some more updates come out, I'll make some more videos of it as well. We'll see. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time.